today's interview episode, you get to meet Katie Brinkley, the owner of Next Step Social Communications, a social media agency, host of the Rocky Mountain Marketing Podcast, and author of The Social Shift. Katie and I met at a conference several years ago. I've seen her rock the room with her on-stage keynotes, and she's even taught me a thing or two about social media. The thing I love most about Katie is that she's upfront about the irony of her being a social media agency owner, yet not wanting you to spend all day, every day on social media. She actually says not to post every day. Listen in to see if you can catch her formula because she mentions it very briefly. And of course, think about if you were given 5 hours of your time back per week because you outsourced your podcast like Katie did, and perhaps 3 more hours per week because you started following her formula for social media, what would you do with 7 or 8 hours of extra time each week? Implement processes? Network more? Spend more time on client acquisition? Listen to the end to find out how she spends her time as a business owner. Katie, thank you so much for being here with me today. Let's start out by hearing your personal definition of abundance.
You said that you were going to ask me that question, but I didn't realize we are going to hit the ground running asking that question because honestly, it took me a while to figure out what abundance really meant to me and what it meant to my business and to the way I wanted to live my life. I had never really thought about abundance as something that you could strive for with what you want to get out of being an entrepreneur and being a business owner. And it wasn't until actually, we were just talking about him. I met my friend Sean, that he really allowed me to think about running my business so that I could live my life with abundance. So that's a real long way of me not answering your question right there, if you noticed. But I really wanted to give that background because I think a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners aren't thinking about that. They're thinking about, what do I need to do next to get to that next milestone? What do I need to do this. I should be doing that. And really, you don't need to. You don't need to do all the things. And I found that it was about a year ago that I was trying to do all the things. I wasn't living my life with abundance. I was working myself, honestly, to death. I was working myself so hard and trying to do all the things and be a good mom and be a good friend and doing all these things that all of a sudden I was underneath my desk crying. And nobody should be living their life that way, especially when you're the business owner. You're able to craft your business and build your life the way you want to live it. And it wasn't until I took a giant step back and said, you know what? I can't be doing this anymore. The times that I am happiest is when I am with my family and when I love social media. I love podcasting, but it's the whole reason I decided to start my own business is so that I could have the quality of life to where I can shut down my laptop at 3:00 and be at home with my kids. I can be their softball coach. I can go to all the swim practices. And that's when I really started living my life with abundance, was when I gave myself the permission to not do all the things. I didn't need to be the business owner that, scaled 7 figures in, 3 years. I didn't need to do this. I didn't need to post on social media every day. I don't have to be on TikTok. And I gave myself the permissions and everything changed.
Yeah. So thank you for walking us through that because I think that is a super normal, common journey for business owners, right? Either we're burnt out from corporate And so we accidentally recreate a corporate environment for ourselves that we are trapped in, or we, start this business thinking like, maybe it's a money thing. Like, all right, for whatever reason, I'm not going to work for anybody else. I'm going to do my own thing, and kind of hustling for that next level of income or whatever it is that you're focused on, again, ends up accidentally trapping you in this hamster wheel. And it's not until we often hit like a point of burnout or some major stressor or a health issue where you can't work and you're like forced to pull back, or kids, right? Like when something happens with them, or maybe we become a parent, or many people our age are starting to care for our parents.
Yeah.
So there's like all these different life factors happening. And it's important that, if possible, if we could think about, all right, how is my business supporting me in my desire for the way I want my lifestyle to be? And then that's where that abundant piece comes in. But yeah, it's definitely not in the forefront of anybody's mind, I think, during the first couple of years of business.
Well, and I think that, I came from corporate, but I started my business working from the couch in between naps and, after my daughter had gone to bed. And so when I went to work, I was working really hard because I was trying to get as much done in a short amount of time. And now that my daughters are 7 and 10, well, they're at school 5 days a week, I don't need to work that hard for 8 hours. But I had found I was getting into that. I was in that cycle of when you go to work, you work really hard, and I was getting a lot done. Holy cow, was I getting a lot done? But exactly like you said, I was burning myself out, even though I was doing something that I really loved and it made me happy. I was still burning myself out with it.
So talk to us a little bit about your business and maybe even the evolution of your business. What did you start out doing? Was it all social media, or did you start with the podcast first? Or how did you, like you say, come from corporate, started working with your littles while they were napping? What did that look like?
Well, I started with both, but I didn't start with both. So there's your cliffhanger right there. I started by helping bands with their MySpace pages in college.
Yes.
So that's when I got my first introduction into social media. And the reason I was all in on MySpace is because Facebook was still only for certain colleges, and my college wasn't cool enough to be on there, I guess, even though I had a .edu, email address. So I was all in on MySpace, and I quickly learned what an impactful tool it was when you went in with intention, not just going in and killing time. I went in and I started networking with bands because I worked at the radio station in college, and I was like, look, I like your music. Would you be willing to send us your music for free? I'll get you some airtime. And it allowed me to really have a lot more opportunities with bands that were just on the cusp of hitting it big, getting to know them. I'd get to interview them. And I loved the power that social media gave when you went in strategically. But social media anything didn't exist. I graduated and I went to, I actually was fortunate enough to land my dream job in radio. So I was the post-game reporter at a sports radio station here for about 3 years. And then this thing called Sirius XM came out, and everyone in the radio industry panicked. And I was like, oh, maybe it's my sign. I should get out. And I had a short stint as a flight attendant, got to see the world, and then moved into corporate marketing and did social media again there, in addition to script writing, media buys, more traditional marketing. Mm-hmm. And then my position was eliminated because we had a merger. And then a week later, I found out I was pregnant with my youngest daughter. And I was like, well, who's going to want to hire me? And then be like, oh, thanks you're hired. Now you're going on maternity leave. So I was sitting in my boss's office at the time, and I was talking with her. And I was like, I just don't know what to do next. And she said, well, Katie, you're so good at social media. It'd be really cool if you found a way to have that be all you do, and then find a way to get back into radio somehow. And here I am nearly 8 years later, and I kind of have, because I have my podcast now, and I have a social media agency. And I built the social media agency first, like I said before, from my couch. And I remember I landed my first client in November of 2016. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm onto something. And then I landed my second client, who's still with me today. And it's just grown from there, from working on my couch, trying to just bring in some income until my daughter was old enough to go to daycare. And by the time that happened, I was like, I'm making more money than if I were to go back to the corporate world and pay for daycare. What if we just figure this out? And I said, it's been 8 years now, and I've had my podcast for 4.5. And the podcast was something I'd always wanted to do. I didn't know how I was going to do it. It seemed like it was a lot of work. Honestly, it seemed like, man, launching a podcast is really hard. But I went to a conference and I met all these people that had podcasts, and they made it seem so easy. And I was like, well, then there's this thing that happened in April of 2020, and I was given the gift of time. And I thought, well, what better time than now? And the rest is history.
Have you ever pictured yourself hosting your own show? Maybe it's time. This show is edited and produced by podcastabundance.com. And if you like what we're doing, we'd like to do it for your business too. I'm Virginia Elder, and I've been helping independent financial service professionals launch and grow their podcasts since 2019. I coach you through branding, establishing structure and workflow, strategy, and recording your episodes. Then my team and I professionally edit your audio and video so you don't have to. We'll even write your episode descriptions and titles so that when potential customers turn to Google, your show appears in their search results. Elevate your brand's visibility, become more approachable, and attract potential clients, all with your own podcast. I'm here to hold your hand and make podcasting the exciting, up-leveling experience it should be, skirting you past the tech and software struggles. Take the first step by booking a call with me using the link in the show notes or by visiting podcastabundance.com. Now, on to the rest of the show. Yeah, that's cool. I didn't recognize the timing of when you launched your podcast. I just knew Katie and you had the show, and I didn't realize the timing of it. So you were one of those pandemic podcasters.
Yep. But I'm still going. So
but you're still going. That's the difference.
Myself on the back there.
Yes. There are so many people that jumped on that train, and whether they went back to corporate or whatever happened, but they definitely fizzled out. So there was this big spike.
Yeah.
So that's kind of neat though.
Yeah. But having a podcast, that's the one thing. I've published over 300 episodes now. And I've went from doing a weekly show to now I produce episodes twice a week. And holy cow, it's the one thing I am absolutely consistent with. In all of my business is my podcast. It's the favorite part of what I get to do that I call a job. It really is fun being able to connect with people in such an intimate way. It really is. When someone tunes into a podcast, you get to know someone so much better than you can from watching, a reel or a TikTok video or even meeting them at a networking event. There's so many. The power of podcasting is really incredible, and there's nothing more. I don't know. Bucket filling. That's a common phrase in our household, of filling the bucket. But there's nothing that fills my bucket more than when I go to an event and someone says, "Oh, I listened to your podcast." And it's like, you're one of the numbers, and it's so cool to see those people in person and connect with them.
Yeah. So talk to me about, as you thought, I want to launch this podcast and it can support my business in this way. And here's what my work week looks like now. How am I going to fit a podcast into my work week? We already kind of touched on the burnout piece a little bit. What did that process and thought line look like for you?
Well, when I launched my podcast, I was doing all of it. I was finding the guests, I was doing the editing, I was writing the show notes, I was doing the promotion, I was making the social media graphics. I was doing everything.
Wow.
And I was allowing myself an hour a week for my podcast, but really it was taking at least like 5 to 6. And it wasn't until I started batching my content and outsourcing that allowed me to really remain consistent with my show, because it allowed me to be really picky with who my guests were. And it allowed me to get ahead. Batching your content, it allows you to remain consistent. I do 2 a week. And I'm still able to go on vacations. I'm still able to, live my life, not just be sitting behind the microphone the whole time. I'm allowed to do guest interviews. And it's all because I have the system in place of, these are my recording days. I'll send them out to guests I want to have come on, batching the content and then outsourcing it. But outsourcing made such a difference because, like I said, I didn't realize how much time I was spending producing my show that, again, once I used Toggle. For people who aren't familiar with Toggle, it's a time tracking tool. It's free. I recommend everyone use it. If you're at the point of saying, like, I don't have time for X, I'm sure you do. And I'm sure you're spending an exorbitant amount of time on something that you think takes 0 time. For me, it was my podcast. And once I had those 5 hours a week back, because I outsourced the production, everything changed. I was able, like I said, to batch, pick my guests, and remain consistent.
That's awesome. How do you batch, or because this is one of my soapboxes as well. So I would love to hear someone else's perspective of batching and how you do it or how you advise it, or what are the top 3 things you think about as you're planning your schedule? Just any tips that you can share on how to be successful at batching your content, especially for your podcast.
Well, and this is, Virginia, I think this is an opportunity for us to kind of discuss how we both do it, because I don't know if mine is necessarily the best way to do it, but I use my podcast. My podcast has evolved. It started in 2020 as a way for me to network with people during COVID because the world had shut down and I was trying to launch and grow in a business. And so now I'm not interviewing business owners anymore. I'm actually interviewing digital marketing experts. And I use that as a networking opportunity to get to know speakers and people that I admire in the digital marketing world and have a one-on-one conversation with them. So when I batch my content, a lot comes from different conferences that I go to. And I'll go up to the speakers if I'm not, or if I'm speaking at the event, and I'll invite them to come on my show so that I can have a one-on-one conversation with them, get to know them better, network with them a little bit more. And I get a lot of people right after an event. And then I go to events about every other month. And so that's kind of how I get my digital marketing experts. And when I run out, then I go back through my Rolodex of, okay, I know I've had this person on before, but we only talked about this. They know a lot more. What if I ask them about what they're promoting and, what they're getting ready to launch right now? And we do a podcast on that just until I can fill my backlog again. So I'm curious on how you do it, because I use mine almost entirely at different conferences that I go to.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and I love what you said about how it was that you were recording with business owners. Yeah. And I'm sure there's a sales strategy or something there.
Yes.
And then now, and let's talk about that too in just a sec. But I love how you've shifted and you said, okay, now I'm focused on interviewing digital marketing. And it's still this networking thing and relationship establishing that you're doing intentionally. for business. So before we really dive into how we batch, will you tell more about your strategy, your two different strategies that you've employed on your podcast?
Well, kind of three now, honestly.
Okay.
So the way that the podcast started was, again, networking, and I interviewed different Denver-based business owners about their entrepreneur journey and what marketing that they've found worked for them in the past. And most of them would say, "Oh, well, we do, we've done this, or we do a lot of direct mail or a lot of networking events." And then I'd ask about their digital marketing or their social media. And they say, "Oh, well, it's always kind of been a struggle." And after we were done recording, I'd be like, "Yeah, so, tell me why social media has been a struggle for you." And well, that's what I do. And so that's how I was able to, again, grow my business. Was I asked them questions about how successful that they were. And then, well, how are you doing if in the digital world, especially now that everything's been shut down, you're not able to go to networking events and stuff. How are you utilizing social media to help grow your business? And almost all of them came to the answer of, it's something that we've been neglecting and now we're having to catch up on. And I was like, well, I can help with that. And so that's how the podcast started. And it really wasn't about downloads. I think a lot of people get caught up in the downloads. And I mean, it's just like a like on Facebook or, for me, it was just a vanity metric because I never had any ambitions of being the next Joe Rogan or, anything like that. I was using it as a marketing tool, which I think is a very powerful way to grow your business and use it as a marketing tool. Because look, we're sitting down right now having a one-on-one conversation. Yeah. You could ask me anything and I'll tell you if I'm struggling with this or if I'm awesome at this. Right. And so I mean, it was great. It did okay. I mean, I'll be honest, I think it maybe I had 30 downloads per episode, which is probably terrible. But I mean, hey, it was 30 new people that were listening to me. So, so that's how it started. And then I started meeting a lot of people. I was really active on Clubhouse. I don't know if you remember Clubhouse, but I was really active on that. And I was meeting all these really cool digital marketers. And again, everybody back then had the gift of time. And I was like, man, it'd be cool to talk with them just one-on-one. I've seen them speak on stages before. What would you like to come on my podcast? And so then I was alternating between the Denver business owner for lead gen and then the digital marketer for my own networking and my own education purposes. And before I knew it, those ones were the ones that people were downloading the most. And again, the Denver-based business owner ones weren't getting as many downloads. And I found I was enjoying the digital marketing interviews more. I really liked sitting down with them and talking with them about different digital marketing trends. And I was creating really great relationships. And soon it was then 3 digital marketing experts a month and 1 Denver-based business owner. And I'm like, why am I still doing these, business owner ones if I'm not, my heart's not in it? This is my show. This is what I want to do. These are the conversations I want to have. Let's make the switch. And so after 2 years, I made the switch to doing just having conversations with digital marketing experts. And the show started growing. And then when I didn't have a guest, I would do a solo episode. And I found those were the ones all of a sudden that were getting even more downloads. So because I was interviewing people all the time, but I wasn't sharing my own insights and my own strategies and my own, thoughts on digital marketing. And that I'd built a community up of people who had started to know, like, and trust me because I was bringing in all these great conversations. And hey, I also know a lot. And those were the ones that were really getting a lot more downloads. So that's what last year caused me to launch the solo episodes on Thursdays. So I'm just spending a lot of time behind the microphone.
Yeah. Well, and for clarity, so now you're doing a interview with a digital marketing agency owner or, maybe the marketing expert in that agency. And then a different day a week, you're doing a solo episode where you're teaching digital
Yes.
marketing for business owners.
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. So I think there's a bunch of things in there that we can highlight. Is one, you started off with a really great plan, but that doesn't mean that you're beholden to that plan even when you're not excited or in love with it anymore. There's a shift that happened in who you interviewed and how often you're publishing episodes. I think that's a big piece of the conversation. Anytime somebody wants to launch a podcast, they're always like, we got to have the perfect plan. And I'm like, well, we should have a plan and there should be some intention behind it. And there should be a call to action and some way that it's driving business, but it doesn't have to be permanent or perfect.
I think that's where pod fade, podcast burnout comes a lot, is because people are like, oh, I'm bored of this topic. I'm bored of doing this. And I'm not enjoying it as much. I'm just going to stop, or I'll just skip a week. And before you know it, then the podcast is dead.
Yeah.
And I think that giving myself the space to say, this is my show. This is the way that I want it to be run. These are the conversations I want to have. It's allowed me to remain consistent because I've given myself that flexibility behind the microphone to find the conversations that I think are valuable with my audience in mind. My audience has come and they've stuck around because I bring in great conversations. And whether it's, again, a Denver-based business owner or me just rambling about the latest happenings over on Threads, they're there to listen every week.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the piece that we're not saying, but that is there, is every one of these moves is a step toward abundance for your own personal lifestyle and feelings about your show and your business. And you mentioned outsourcing gave you back 5 hours a week. And, all of these little decisions where you feel like it's a pivot of in some way, it's actually a move toward creating your most abundant life. So that's what's kind of the underlying theme there. So I want to ask and circle back to the batching situation. For me, when I was launching this show, which is actually a relaunch from like a 2019 show, I want to say yeah, sure, go back and listen to those episodes. Maybe don't.
It's funny. I just learned that a lot of people do take down their first few episodes because they're embarrassed by them, which I think is a silly move.
Same.
I mean, I still have if you want to listen to some terrible podcasting, go back and listen to the episodes 1, 2, and 3 of Rocky Mountain Marketing. I was nervous. I did all the editing, and I come from radio. So I just want to say that, Virginia, the first few episodes or the first, like you said, the first iteration of this show, it might not be great, but how cool to go back and listen and be like, look how far I've come.
Exactly.
Look at what I've done. Like I've grown so much.
Yeah. Well, and that I align with that advice very much so. Don't take down your first few episodes, even if they're super bad. If you recorded in your car or whatever you did, that's fine. That was you taking action. And there's something to be said for that because you wouldn't be where you are now if you didn't do that. The other piece of that is, for me, when I find someone who I am like, holy cow, look at what this person is doing. They're so amazing. I want to buy their thing. I want to follow their stuff. I want to join their mastermind. I want to do all the stuff with them. I actually am that person who goes back in the archives and listens to, let's say they're at episode 400 now. I'm going back to episode 150, 10, 1. And I want to hear audibly their growth, not just in their sound and technical details of maybe they're in a studio now versus before they were in their car or something. But I want to hear the growth in themselves as a person and as a business owner and how they've matured through the past 4 years or 5 years, however long it's been that they've been running their business and consistently producing a podcast. So
Yeah.
I love that stuff.
It's crazy to me too, with people that being their hang up of, well, one, what if no one listens? Or two, what if I stumble? What if I say or or what if I sound silly? There's so much of our own judgment that gets in the way from just stepping into your own abundance and your own self-confidence of this, because it's so, like I said, it's just so gratifying to be like, I produced this or I made this connection. And my podcast changed my business. It changed my business. It's like I said, it's the one thing I am 1000% committed to week in and week out. And I thought, what the heck am I going to have to say about social media for, more than
300 episodes.
Yeah. I was thinking 10. And here I am at 300. And there's plenty to talk about. There's plenty of conversations to be had. So if you haven't started a podcast yet, your message needs to be heard. And you might think, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. I just do X. It's nothing special. There's someone out there that cares. There's somebody out there that wants to learn more. And there's a conversation that should be had around that topic. So you're your own biggest hurdle.
Absolutely. In every step of the way, right? You implement a process in your business, you start doing a throwback Thursday, something, whatever, and your clients love it, or whatever you implement. And you're always like, dang it, if I only knew to do this earlier.
Yeah.
Like that always happens. So it's the same thing with the podcast. But as far as batching goes, I knew that running the business and producing a podcast would be a challenge. And that was actually why I podfaded before, because I didn't have a team. So I was very much like you in sharing that I was doing everything, running the business, creating the podcast, all that. It just completely burnt out. So I did drop the podcast. So this time, knowing that, hey, A, we have a team that produces podcasts and is really good at it now, I can use them. And B, for my time, I want to be spending my time doing this very set list of activities. And if I'm going to add recording podcasts to that list of activities, when and where does that fit in? So I looked at the calendar and started planning a couple hours a week that I could record in, and I'd be fine if I had 2 interviews a week. And that group of interviews, once they were booked, I would look ahead and say, okay, so if we launch on this date, I'll have 3 months of interviews, like batched and ready to go, right? And I did also want to incorporate solo episodes, like you're saying. Like that's an important part of being a business owner, is like teaching and sharing your knowledge on your show so that you're the expert and people are reaching to you for the help. And so those I find are easier to batch, honestly.
The solo episodes?
Yes.
Same. Yeah.
You can script it or not, or, if you're not doing video, you can sit here in your pajamas
Yep.
and record. But for us, batching was always a very key component. And that's something that I talk to clients about when they're launching is, you've got to stay ahead, because at any point, if you're thinking, I've got to record this week so my episode can go live this week, you're already stressed. Let's just be honest. You're already stressed. You're already on the verge of maybe not quitting completely, but letting a ball drop somewhere. So we just don't even want to get to that point. And then the other tip I would have for anybody listening would be that if you do start to feel like you're running up against that deadline with your interviews, do a little mini series of solo episodes, because like I already said, you have so much control over those, and you can just block off one day. You don't have to schedule with anybody. There's so much freedom within that day, and you can record 4 or 5 back-to-back little mini episodes buy yourself, quote unquote, buy yourself that time. That's a month of episodes right there. If you're doing one a week, then you have time.
And I think a lot of people get nervous about like wearing the same stuff. It's funny because I've just kind of started wearing the same stuff so that I have like a cycle of maybe 5 different shirts that I wear, and like in the summer, and it makes it easy because I'm always kind of wearing the same ish thing, and it doesn't look weird then with my podcast comes out and I'm wearing the same shirt because maybe I'm wearing glasses, and then in the next episode I'm not wearing glasses. It's
it could be a different day.
Yeah, don't worry about the clothes you're wearing and being like, oh, people might think that I batched. It's not a big deal.
Good.
People don't care.
I'm like, good. I want you to know that I batched. You will see an episode of me wearing a sweater that goes live in July. Okay, let's just be clear. But yeah, so how did you approach batching for your podcast? Or maybe how do you batch your interviews? Because that seems to be the struggle because, then you're relying on someone else's calendar as well.
Yeah, there's some times where I think that, Virginia, you and I, like, this was scheduled back in, I want to say April. And we booked way far out in advance for when we recorded this. And it was just because our schedules didn't line up. And you didn't care. I didn't care. We knew it was going to happen eventually because we both wanted to have the conversation. So just if someone can't record until 5 months later because your schedules don't line up, don't worry about it. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. You'll still get that interview. I have set recording days too. And I think it's really helpful because then you have that time. Like that's okay. I know on Mondays, for me on Mondays, I have to make sure that I wash my hair because I'm going to do at least one podcast recording that day.
Yeah.
So create that routine, create that system. And if someone can't get in, right away, just be understanding. And, life happens, summer happens, travel happens. So don't worry about it being, a couple months in advance. And then, I always make sure that I talk with the host, or if I am the host, I let the guest know when the episode's going to come out so that you're not, using specific dates or anything like that. Like I didn't ask this, and that's why I think I'm so cognizant of it now, is I once did a podcast interview and it was audio only, which is, it's fine because podcast first, but we were recording it and I had made a couple mentions about the snow outside and skiing and the snow. And the podcast didn't come out until the end of September. So almost 9 months later. And I was like, man, people must think that Colorado is like this crazy snow-filled area that we're already snowboarding and skiing. And so that's where I always try to make sure I find out when the episode's going to come out, because you don't want to have people thinking it's going to come out somewhat soon if it's not. People shouldn't care if it's not. It's, just make sure that the content is still relevant for the listener. That's the most important thing. So yeah, that's kind of a weird way of answering batching, but the more you batch, the easier it's going to be to remain consistent and to build out a good promotion schedule. So for me, because I'm producing so much content with 2 a week, I actually don't promote that week's episode on social media. I actually choose one of the 2. And most of the time I use my solo episodes for my email list, and then my guest interview for my social media content. But I promote last week's episode. So right now I'm promoting last week's episode. It's already gotten its first run. And the reason why I do that is because if people like what they heard, they'll have 2 additional episodes that they can just continue listening to. Yeah. They have a real short one, but that's just me to build out the know, like, and trust factor a little bit more. And then they have another guest interview that they can continue learning from. So batching makes everything easier. You can develop a strategy that works for you, but the most important strategy is a consistent one.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And so often I personally am most comfortable if I have about a 4-week lead on whatever I'm doing, because I may or may not get busy or get sick or have a vacation. Like you mentioned, there might be a holiday in there.
Yeah.
So I'm most comfortable with at least 4 weeks ahead for me and for clients. So I'm always encouraging, like, what can I do to help you get ahead on your episodes? Would you like some topic ideas? Or, we'll do a whole brainstorm session, whatever it takes. The other piece is that if you are doing interviews, and let's say I want to build out my month for interviews, so I need, 4 or 5, depending on the month, I'm actually going to reach out to like 7 or 8 people, because not everyone will respond right away, get your email. Maybe they're out of town. Maybe their schedule doesn't work with you or match up with yours. There's different things that are going on their end. So I always kind of over-invite based on the it's fine if all 8 people respond, great. Then we got 2 months of content, right? So thinking about that, not necessarily like, oh, I want this one person on my show, let me just send one invitation to them for next week's episode.
Yeah,
I'm not doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like, that seems really stressful to me.
I agree. And we're trying to avoid that at all costs, right? Like the whole abundance thing in place firmly. What can I do to create space in my life?
Exactly.
So I loved what you said about promoting last week's episode this week on social media. And I know you have lots of other amazing opinions to help make social media better, easier, more functional for us as business owners. I just want to give you a few minutes to highlight your business, what you do, and, some tips if you want to share them.
Amazing. Yeah. I don't think I have a social media agency, but I don't think that people should be on social media all day creating content. That sounds terrible to me. I have a life to live, and I want to use social media as an incredible tool, but it shouldn't take up your entire business. And I developed a 4-post strategy that actually is really effective. You don't need to post that often, and you can take one piece of content and really you just repurpose it 4 different ways. So yeah, even like I said, I have an agency, but I don't want you and your business to spend all day on it. I actually wrote a whole book about it. It's called The Social Shift. You can get that at katiebrinkley.com/book if you want to check it out. Or on Amazon. It's on Amazon as well. But social media, podcasting, these are tools to grow your business. They shouldn't take up all of your business. Even yours truly here. I have a podcast. I have a social media agency. I'm not on social media that much. And my podcast only takes me about an hour a week, and that's 2 episodes. So, create the things, use these things as tools so you can focus on other aspects of your life so you can live an abundant life.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that being said, before we go, and we'll talk about your social handles and all that so people can follow you, since you're not spending all your time on social media, where as a business owner do you focus on spending your time?
For me, networking events and conferences are the place to be. Believe it or not, I am an introvert, so going to these conferences is a little exhausting for me because I, go out and introduce myself and have these conversations. But they're so impactful because whether or not I get a lead from it, I always am looking for at least someone to come on my podcast and just have a conversation with somebody. So that's the most powerful way for me to grow my business is at different networking events, whether they're in person or online. I'd go to at least one a week.
That's awesome. Very good advice. Well, now share with us where we can follow you and find you and listen to your show and all that good stuff.
Amazing. Yeah. So my podcast is Rocky Mountain Marketing. Would love it if you gave it a listen. Comes out twice a week. And then if you want to connect with me, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. You can find me at Katie Brinkley.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Katie. I appreciate your time with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.